everyone. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am recording from Los Angeles right now. It is the morning after the Academy's annual Governors Awards, and I am joined on the line by my old Vanity Fair and Little Gold Men colleague, Rebecca Ford, to talk about all of it. Rebecca, it was so good to see you in formal wear last night.
This is so exciting. 2 days in a row, in person, on the podcast. It's really a dream.
They cannot keep us apart.
I know.
Later in this episode, you'll hear the conversation I had with someone who I saw at the Governors Awards last night, although who didn't I see at the Governors Awards? I talked to Jesse Eisenberg. He is the writer, director, and star of A Real Pain. It's out in theaters now. It's really terrific. I didn't get a chance to talk to him in the room. He seems like somebody who would not mind being in the room full of that many famous people, but also might rather go home and put on his pajamas. Rebecca, do you get that sense sometimes when you're at these events that they're like great artists who will do this because it's good for their movie, but want to go home immediately?
It's definitely a mix, I feel like. With actors, I don't know if you can ever tell because they're actors and they're acting and they can act like they enjoy it. But I do think the Governor's Award is one where most people seem pretty happy to be there. It's also early enough in the season where they're still pretty fresh, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so I had never been to the Governor's Awards before this year. You'd been a few times. And what everyone had always said is like, it's not only the fun one because there are no winners and no losers. The only Oscars handed out are the honorary awards, which are announced months in advance. But everybody is there. Like people who, maybe we can talk about who was in that room who we don't really think has a chance at an Oscar nomination, but they're there. It's just like the widest possible swath of the entire season all in one place.
Yeah, I think it's because it's like everyone still has a chance at this point, A lot of the races are unformed, and so everyone shows up, and it is nice when they're honoring like such big names in the industry that, it makes sense you show up to honor Quincy Jones or Richard Curtis. Like they've worked with so many people that a lot of people in those rooms have relationships with them.
Yeah, I mean, and Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, who are the producers of the Bond movies, they were also among the honorees, and then Juliet Taylor, the casting director, we should say, is the other one. But with the Bond movies especially, Daniel Craig gets up there and to present them with their award, which makes perfect sense. And he made this joke about, like, everyone wants to know who the new Bond is. He might be in this room. And, like, we knew he didn't mean it, but there was, like, that minute being like, oh, my God, what if, like, they meet the new Bond in this room and it all happens here?
I was just, like, waiting for an announcement at the end of their speech. Just like, here's the new Bond. God. He's right here. Yeah. He or she is right here.
I was about to say, I'm trying to think of who, like, because there were a lot of young up-and-coming actors in there who were in various projects. Like, I saw Fred Heschinger, who's in Thelma and Gladiator 2, talking to Justice Smith, who is in, I saw the TV Glow. And, like, I bet they've been in the same audition rooms for year after year. So it's those points of connection where you're like, oh, this person probably knows that person, or they've worked together on this thing before. It just kind of happens over and over again as you walk around the room.
Yeah, I think the first people I saw were Tom Hanks and Adrian Brody just like talking in a corner, and you're like, I'm here, I'm at the Governor's Awards, because it's just like giant A-list celebrities everywhere you see, and then also that really like exciting talent or discoveries of the year. So it's one of the best events of the year, I do think.
Yeah, and the context in which it's happening, and you are now in a better position to explain it than I am, because you're filming video interviews. Like once upon a time, the Vanity Fair Hollywood issue cover would have shot around this weekend. This year it came out earlier, as we can see. But there's just event after event after event going on right now. Like, if you are in one of these nominated or hoping to be nominated movies, is it just like every day is 12 different events and you never get to sit down?
Yeah, I was talking to some of that talent, and this is the weekend because they're all in town. Everything is booked this weekend. Like all the trades do their sort of awardsy roundtable kind of things this weekend. And then they do a ton of panels and Q&As. Like I was asked to moderate more than I could have ever humanly done because every film is having them, because it's just like the weekend to do it while everyone's here. So none of them looked as tired as I thought they would have by Sunday night. But
those actors, they have that skill.
They've got that glow, and they've got those professional hair and makeup teams.
And we just had to dress ourselves and somehow fit into that room. I think we looked great. So the thing that I had heard about the Governor's Awards for so long from you and other people is that you get a sense of who's really capturing everybody's attention. Like when people walk into the room, everyone wants to talk to them. I mean, it's a room full of so many famous people. There's not like one person that's ever going to happen for. And I really tried to look out for that last night, and I'm not totally sure I found an obvious one. I wonder if you saw something different of among the contenders who seemed to really be grabbing people's attention.
I don't think it had what I've seen before, like the Parasite year, or even like with Coda, where a cast walks in and like the whole room kind of turns their energy towards them. I don't think we had that this year, and I think that is part of the reason that everything feels a little unpredictable. You know, there were a lot of giant actors in that room. You know, of course, everyone turns their head when Nicole Kidman or Angelina Jolie walks in, but you didn't feel that sort of like buzzy thing when a certain cast walked in. You know, I do think Honora Mikey Madison sort of has that because she is really the discovery of the season. Like people really want to meet her and get to know her. But yeah, I agree. There's not like a clear like, oh, everyone was talking about this kind of situation. Yeah. I think maybe if the Wicked people had attended, it might have had that.
That's right. Yeah, they're having their premiere in London. Yeah. So like no one involved in Wicked was here. I did briefly get to talk to Yura Borisov and Mark Edelstein, who are, you know, the two Russian actors in Honora, and they were about to be introduced to Barbara Broccoli by someone, and I was like, oh my God, what if they're a Bond villain? Like, what a good idea would that be? So I feel like they also are getting some of that Honora, like, wow, you're brand new. I'm so excited to see you bump out of that. The other proposal I was going to make, and this wasn't so much watching Buzz, but literally on stage, is Coleman Domingo was everywhere during this thing. He gave like kind of the opening speech. There was no host, so he kind of like introduced everybody. And then he also narrated the Quincy Jones video tribute that played at the end. And then, I don't know if you could see this from your table, when Jennifer Hudson and this chorus of people took the stage for the musical Quincy Jones tribute, Coleman Domingo was the only person in the room standing and dancing along until everybody else stood up. And I've been a big believer in Sing Sing all along, and we haven't talked about it. I'd love to know your Sing Sing thoughts. But that was a thing where I was like, he's so charming. His speech went so well. He wins people over. That movie wins people over. And it kind of confirmed my belief that Sing Sing is maybe stronger than people think.
I really hope it is. I am also a big fan of it. I think they have needed sort of a second wind, you know, because that movie came out so early, and I don't want it to get drowned out by sort of newer releases. But he is sort of the perfect speaker for this movie because he is so charming in that room, and he had that funny bit about like having headshots to give Barbara Broccoli, you know, so he can be in the Bond movie too. And I think it went over really well. And every presenter, except I think the last one, is also a, you know, Oscar hopeful. And I think a lot of them sort of reminded a room full of Academy voters that they are charming and in the race and talented. And it's like they're not giving acceptance speeches, but they are winning over people. And so it's funny, they were all A24 movies, I think. It was Coleman for Sing Sing, Daniel Craig for Queer.
Wow. Nicole Kidman for Baby Girl. And Hugh Grant for Heretic.
Yeah, so quite a night for that studio.
Yeah. Jamie Foxx was the one exception for, got up there with his Trump impression and made everybody kind of slink in their seats.
Maybe the weirdest moment of the night, right?
Well, I read about this in my newsletter, and I wonder your thoughts too. As I've been thinking, I think everyone has, like, how is the election going to cast a pall over award season? Because we all remember in 2016, it was such a huge thing. Yeah. And I have been feeling in my personal life that everyone's like, oh my God, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to like get into this. And that was definitely the vibe in the room too. Like, I think Richard Curtis was really the only person who really specifically was like, yeah, it's been a tough couple of weeks. Everyone else kind of focused elsewhere.
Yeah, Richard Curtis did it in a way that he didn't say the name, I think. Yeah. And so it's like where a lot of us, I think, are at mentally. And so I think that part went over well. But then, you know, when Jamie Foxx got up and started doing an impression, I think you could feel people sort of tense up in the room. I think everyone just needs a little more time. I do think it might be different in a few weeks, but this was the first event post-election. So you could kind of still feel that people weren't quite ready for that, I think. Yeah.
It feels like we're not going to get like Meryl Streep's Golden Globe speech from 2017 where like people were like standing on their feet and cheering about like standing up for justice. Like I think I don't know what the vibe is going to be, and like eventually the actual Trump administration will start and things might change, but it does feel like there's this like a don't invite this guy into our space kind of feeling.
Yeah, I agree. It feels different than last time, and maybe it's going to stay that way. I don't know. It's going to be changing so much over the next few months, I think.
Yeah.
We'll have to see with the way the speeches go, or just if everyone's just going to ignore the pain as much as possible.
Well, and I also tried to ask, I saw a couple of like awards reps while I was there, and I tried to ask like, how are you adjusting your strategy or like, leading into this in any way? And no one seemed to have an answer for that either. Like it kind of surprised me that there's not even movements at this point, because you don't want to seem cynical, but like some of these films like have more resonance now than they did before the election. And it feels like even they don't quite know how to wrap their heads around that.
I don't know if they'd admit it to you, Katey, if they were, because it's
even
like,
off the record.
Yeah. I don't doubt those conversations are happening, but because you're right, there are a lot of films that have messages that feel even more powerful now, but I don't think they're going to tell us that. But I think we may
They don't want to admit it.
Yeah, exactly.
So back to the people who were on stage, like Hugh Grant, to me, I think was like kind of ran away with the whole night on some level. And he and Richard Curtis also, actually. Like Richard Curtis then got on stage to accept his Oscar and kind of threw it back at him. I don't want to like overstate it by being like, well, his role in Heretic might now have bigger Oscar chances, but like it made me wonder if there's like another Hugh Grant revival coming based on how good he was at winning over that very influential room.
I agree. I think that was the best speech. It was just so funny and warm. And if you're sitting in that audience, you're like, man, Hugh Grant is always good, like always great. And then, and I did notice that Richard Curtis sort of threw it back at him, and at one point mentioned the film that he was in the race for.
Yeah, mentioned Heretic.
He was like, you should see him in this documentary, Heretic, which was a really funny joke to make. But also,
really
I'm
funny.
like, you just mentioned his film. Like no one else's film has been mentioned tonight. So it's
That's true.
It was I don't think it could have worked out better for Hugh.
Yeah.
I think it did remind people how incredible he is and how charming he is. And so I think that was definitely the best speech. I agree. And sort of because he is very much on the bubble. I think there's a strong chance for Globes for him. And, the timing's also really good for that.
They can't be campaigning Heretic as a comedy. So that would have to be like a drama Globes lead actor nom for that one.
Yeah, we should look. I mean, it does have funny moments, but it is a horror movie. He's funny. Yeah, I don't know. But I do think that was a nice boost for him for sure.
Yeah, for both of us this fall, I feel like between The Substance and Heretic and Nosferatu, like it's been a real challenge as non-horror people.
It's really the most gross season of all for me.
Did you have a good view of Demi Moore from your seat? Like I saw her kind of making her way around briefly, but she was someone who I was thinking about, like who maybe hasn't been to an event like this in a couple of years, who might kind of have some of that buzz around her.
Yeah, I think she definitely did. She posed with Nicole on the carpet, and I know that I saw those pictures everywhere today, and they were right in my view from my seat. And it was like her and Margaret Qualley were sitting together and like seemed genuinely very close. They were showing each other pictures on their phones, and then Barry Keoghan came over and picked up a chair and sat between them for the whole dinner. It was just one of those things. They were like, what's happening over there? I love those moments. But they did, I think there was a lot of attention on her because everyone's really excited to have her back. And, that role is so incredible. She looks incredible. And I think, she definitely felt like one of the buzziest people in the room.
Yeah, the smaller version of that I was watching from what at the table I could see, Pamela Anderson was there, and she is not wearing makeup very famously, and I've seen pictures of that, but she was like so beautiful in person, seeing her there despite having no makeup on whatsoever, and she was at the same table as Jude Law and Kate Winslet. They all have movies coming out. I think they're all from Roadside Attractions, or they're close enough together. And I feel like The Last Showgirl doesn't have the same quite buzz as The Substance for a lot of reasons, but it's another thing where it's like, maybe you're excited to see Nicole Kidman. She's very famous, but she's done this a lot. It's the people who are like back in this room for the first time in a while or for the first time ever who can like really get the attention in that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting table because it's all these like giant stars that their movies are really on the bubble or you may not really be contenders. And that's the weird thing about that room is like who gets sat together just because they're from the same studio or whatever. And it's always such a random collection. Yeah.
Well, for the fans of The Holiday, Jude Law and Kate Winslet seem to get along great. They were talking all night at one point, like ducked out to the lobby together. So yeah, I mean, it was so distracting. Like I was watching what was going on, but like I just kind of wanted to see what they were up to the entire time.
I had like Tilda Swinton like right in front of me if I looked at the stage, and it's like seeing a angel or a fairy or something.
Yep.
Like she always looks so magical and perfect. And I was just like, how am I supposed to pay attention to anything else when she's there?
See, I never even laid eyes on her. I was looking at the photos from the next morning. I was like, wait a second. I never even saw it. And like, I never saw Angelina Jolie. Like if you're on one side of the room, you're just going to miss a whole other side of the room because that's how many people are in there.
It's really packed. And I was asking a couple like studio reps, what do you tell first time contenders about why they have to be here? Like, how do you even explain how this is a stop on the campaign trail? And he was like, we just tell them it's a nice event to go to. And I was like, okay, I guess you don't really have to explain it. But, you know, as I say, like you're putting yourself in front of a room full of voters.
Yeah.
And you know that room is like 90% voters. Like personal publicists are not allowed. Like there's not a lot of sort of the hanger-ons. It's all the real talent in the room.
Yeah, I just talked to Edward Berger, the director of Conclave, briefly, and he was basically like, I really was worried it was going to be one of those events where we were in a theater and in seats, but there's dinner. And I was so glad there was dinner. And he has to be kind of the representative for that movie. I think all the actors in Conclave are working right now. This is what the Focus people have told me. So it's just been very hard to get them to these events. So he was there. I think Volker Bertelmann, the composer, was there, but, you know, not Stanley Tucci, not Ralph Fiennes.
Right.
But he's really good at this. Like, I think All Quiet on the Western Front probably succeeded in part because he was good at getting out there and talking to people. So, you know, just talking to him for that minute, I was like, okay, yeah, Conclave still has this huge weapon. And aside from all the things that people love about this movie, they've got someone who's really out there to do the work for them.
I know that is one of the groups that I was like, if they did travel as a pack, they'd be undeniable. Because it's like, but they're too big and too busy to really be in the room like that. It has to be more of like a discovery cast. Like you will see the Nickel Boy stars together, and I feel like they kind of have that buzz because people are excited about them, you know? So
yeah, I don't know if I know Ingenue Ellis and Ramel Ross were there. I don't know if the younger actors and Nickel Boys were there.
One of them, which usually they're always together. It was so chaotic in there.
I saw June Squibb was there, 94-year-old June Squibb, and I saw that she was sitting right next to Fred Heschinger, who is in Thelma as well as Gladiator 2. But I think they've become like actual friends from that movie, so I like the idea of them like traveling as
a cute pairing
as a team as well. I mean, the buzz question in the room, I think we both, at least this year, was kind of harder to tell from just being there. But, you know, we've been seeing the Conclave memes lately. We've been seeing everyone like talking about Emilia Perez. I've been trying to ask, you know, people who I've talked to since I've been here this weekend, like, what have you seen? What do you like? Like, I assume you're asking those same questions too. Are there any themes coming up for you of what people are excited to talk about outside of their own movies right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are still talking about Honora. I feel like that's the one that maybe comes up the most. I don't know if that's just because a lot of people have seen it now, you know? And
it's open wide in theaters now, I think.
And it seems to play with all sorts of different types of audiences. Everything else, when I ask about it, feels really polarizing, you know? They either love it or they don't. I think that's a part of why the season is so strange. But that is the one film I feel like most people I talk to really like.
Yeah. It's like, it's not the like, you can recommend it to anybody movie the way that Conclave is, which I do feel like I've been hearing about, but it's like anyone who has seen it is like, oh my God, let me talk to you about this movie in a way that not quite anything else has.
Yeah.
I did hear about The Brutalist too when I asked people. Like I went to an event for the piano lesson and John David Washington was like, if you see Brady Corbett or Corbet, he was like, tell him I loved his movie. So you know, that movie is not in theaters the way that Honora is. So like, I wonder if the pendulum is swinging in that direction at some point too.
I was surprised to hear from a few people about Seed of the Sacred Fig, which was an international feature and not the movie I would expect people to bring up first. But I think that one seems to be emotionally impressing people and, you know, it has an interesting backstory. So I don't know. I think maybe because it is a year of many small films, there's just a lot of different films coming up for people. And what makes it so hard to predict this year, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always go back when I'm trying to think of this wide open year is like, it feels like the emotions are what win things over. And we watched that happen with Coda for sure, Parasite to some extent, even though that was such kind of a bold artistic movie. And I still haven't figured out what the emotional favorite is among any of these, like what really gets people like in their feelings. And I haven't seen Wicked yet. I know that you are among the privileged few who have. Like, it feels like Wicked is taking that mantle right now. But do you feel like that's still the right thing to wait for of like, okay, like whatever's going to sweep people away is going to be the thing that wins?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I always feel like that is what happens in the end. I do think we're all waiting for our emotions to even out after dealing with the events of the country in the last couple weeks. So I think it might just take longer to really understand what that's going to be. I think we're all closely watching Wicked because it does give you all the feelings and has a message that's actually really powerful for where we're at right now. So, like I said, I think that was the one group that was kind of missing from that room last night that would have been interesting to see how they were greeted, I guess.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who knows about box office who was saying that like theater owners are really expecting Gladiator 2, Wicked, and then Moana 2 to be like one of the biggest 10-day periods ever for sales, which like if that happens, if we have this big box office thing to celebrate right now, we're like, it's not quite as scary as it was in May where everyone was like, moviegoing's over forever. Like it's evened out. But I have been starting to wonder if Gladiator 2 and Wicked, even though they've been seen, the critics have weighed in, like if they become huge hits, that they could really change the dynamic here in that way.
Yeah, I mean, if we know that Hollywood loves they saved the box office story and we'll reward them with Oscars. So if that's what's going to be, I'm curious to see how Gladiator does. I feel like Wicked is sort of taking the bigger spotlight, but I think they'll help each other in sort of this a similar way that Barbenheimer did. So we'll see. But yeah, I think we saw Paul Mescal in the room working the room last night and getting plenty of attention. So I think we'll know a lot more after the coming weekend, I think.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we keep saying that, being like, well, we'll understand more after the election, or like this whole
Let's wait till the new year. Let's wait till nominations. Then we'll definitely know.
Well, like, because I haven't, talked to you about this yet, like Nora just keeps sitting there as this kind of default front runner. And like, I think some of us are saying, well, something's going to come along. And more people I keep talking to are like, what if it just wins? Like, what if that's like all it's going to be? Have you landed on either side of that personally?
I'm always in the it's dangerous to be a front runner camp because it's basically been a front runner since May. I mean, that's a very long time to be a front runner. But they do seem to be running a really good campaign. And like I said, everyone who sees it likes it. And they have a very charming Mikey Madison, and Sean Baker's very respected as a filmmaker. So I don't know. I do feel like that's a lot of momentum to keep up for a really long time.
Yeah. On like a fairly small, it's an ambitious movie in a lot of ways, but it's like on the smaller side compared to like Oppenheimer was the front runner for like all of last year, but it was kind of like enormous enough that it could manage to weather that.
Yeah, you were an early believer in Oppenheimer. It took me a while to be like, that's what we're doing. Okay.
It helps that I like loved it. And then also now this year for me, it's The Brutalist, which is like not really like Oppenheimer, but like kind of like Oppenheimer, like men in suits in the middle of the century America trying to accomplish great things. So I have my type.
It does feel like The Brutalist momentum is just getting stronger and stronger as more people see it. I'm very anti any movie over 2.5 hours, but I really was so impressed by it. So I think I walked out of there being like, there's no way Agent Brody doesn't win, So,
I mean, second Oscars, that's always the question that like Nicole Kidman's out there in the mix looking for her second one. I mean, they won the same year, which is like very funny if like they both became acting front runners again this year. I mean, Best Actress remains for me like the hardest nut to crack. Like, I don't know who's going to win any acting category at all. Like, I could not make a confident prediction. And I think Best Actress is the most competitive of all of them. And like, there's like 12 names probably, and you could make a proper Best Actress lineup with any of them.
Someone's actually said to me last night, the weirdest thing about this year is that you can actually talk yourself out of any Best Picture pick. Like, it's almost easier to explain why something wouldn't win instead of why it would this year. And it is true. Like, I could be like, it'll be The Brutalist, and you could talk me out of it. It's just like every film, there's a reason why it wouldn't win. So whichever one does is going to be very
kind of makes
impressive.
You wonder if in early January when we get the Globes, the Globes having no overlap with the Oscars whatsoever, and yet we all know that they have that impact. And then followed by Critics' Choice and SAG. Like if something wins 2 of those, they'll be like, okay, done. Like that's the end of it. Or are we going to be like putting our hands up in the air until March over and over again? I don't know.
I think you're right. I think once we start getting some acceptance speeches and like see people on the stage, that'll make a difference. But I don't know, man. It's such a fun, weird year.
Yeah. If only Richard Curtis was eligible. He gave a great speech last night. He would have locked down that Oscar for sure, but he doesn't have a contender this year.
And I learned something. I didn't know about an impact producer, which is something he talked about on stage.
I actually brought that up in a meeting here at the Ankler this morning. I was like, is this something that needs to get written about? I never. So we should explain. He said at the end of his speech, basically encouraging people to set aside part of their budget to hire an impact producer who, my understanding from what Richard Curtis said on stage, is basically someone who says, okay, your movie's about childhood poverty. Here's a person who's going to make sure that like some money is set aside to work toward that, or that there can be, it gets seen by the right people, that there can be some kind of actual impact there. So you'd never heard of that before either?
No, I hadn't. And I ended up reading about it last night because I was just so curious. And yeah, it's someone who can reach out to politicians or other influential groups that are tied to the cause and like really make an impact. I guess that's why they call it that. Yeah, I thought that was pretty impressive. And with so many producers and directors in the room, you know, I wonder if that'll actually bring about some change, because it was a very like genuine and heartfelt message that he was sharing. I thought it was great.
Did you have any idea that he was responsible for raising so much money for all these causes? Like the extent, I had heard of Red Nose Day, but like in the video tribute for him, they said like he's, you know, eliminated 1 trillion in global debt, poverty, like these crazy stats. I was really blown away by how much he's done.
I kind of was like, why did we wait so long to give this to him? Because he's done a lot more than a lot of other people.
Because they had to wait for Hugh Grant to be in a movie with Oscar buzz to do the tribute for him, obviously.
Yeah, it was between that and the Quincy Jones honor, it was like a pretty, you picked a good one to be your first one, Katey.
Yeah, it was really emotional. Even like Barbara Broccoli, you know, she and her brother Michael G. Wilson are carrying on their father's legacy, making Bond movies. And she had this great line and just be like, thank you, Dad, for giving me this great life. Like, and he won an honorary Oscar before. So I think they're the first children of an honorary Oscar winner to win, which is an odd stat. But yeah, it was like kind of a nice like family feeling on that stage.
It was a lot about legacy in I thought, a really special way. It was a nice combination of like genuine honor to these people and also the campaigning. I think it had the perfect balance.
Yeah. Well, and you remember that the point of this is to celebrate these movies, to like give them visibility. So even if something doesn't get nominated, being part of this whole process puts an attention on them that it wouldn't have otherwise. And I think it's easy to lose track of in this part of the cycle where it's just like interview after panel and like shaking hands with voters. But there's like the Governor's Awards, and being so big and so dedicated to these giants of the industry, do a good job of reminding you of that, I think. And
we got to see Jeremy Strong in person.
Do we ever figure out what his haircut is for?
I Googled it. He's doing the Springsteen movie, apparently. And he's playing his Springsteen's longtime music producer. And then I tried to Google pictures of that man to see if the hair was the same, and it's not. So I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not sure what exactly is happening.
People should look up his hair. It was he was in a very intense conversation with Jude Law that we were watching, which was great, seeing the actors who gravitate toward each other. Before I let you go, because I don't know when I'll have you back and get to pick your brain about Oscars again, like, do you have a rooting interest? Do you have a personal thing that your heart is after this award season that you want to see happen?
I'm really into Nickel Boys. I know I already brought the movie up, but I think that is the perfect example of a filmmaker making a bold choice that works. And I'm getting very frustrated that, you know, I understand it doesn't work for everyone, but I don't know how you can't admire what he did with that movie and sort of the reason he made it that way. So I'm hopeful that, you know, it'll get a lot of critics' love and that'll probably give it the momentum it needs. But
my personal theory is that it's going to win the New York Film Critics Circle. That just feels like right. I mean, Anora is a New York movie, so but it's so popular and it feels like they always try to do some advocacy there. So we'll know that in a couple weeks. And I think you're right that like if it gets some of that critical boost, you know, again, Zone of Interest, we keep making this comparison, but I still think it's accurate of like the critical darling, really bold, inventive movie that because of the way the Oscars work now can go a lot further than they used to.
Do you have one, Katey? Oh, see, I miss these kind of chats that we would just do offline.
Well, I always talked about, I was talking about The Brutalist. We talked about that. But Marianne Jean-Baptiste and Hard Truths, I think I've become like a real acolyte for. And I know you talked to her in Denver. And like, I think you said that like she won over the crowd just by playing this awful character who no one wants to spend time with. And I experienced that too, talking to her. And like, I just think that performance is just monumental. the movie is sad and like she's a difficult character to spend time with, but it's an easy watch. Like if people get a screener of that movie, it's short, it's to the point, it doesn't have any like grand visuals that don't translate. I feel like the more people get to see that movie, the higher her like standing raises, I hope.
And to get her to hear her talk about how they make a Mike Leigh movie is like so fascinating. And I don't, any actor who hears what, she had to do to really help create that character, I don't know how you can't be impressed with what she did. So I agree. Yeah. I think that is just like one of the best performances of the year. So we can both keep
and Mike Leigh movies have a pretty good Oscar track record. Like it kind of goes back and forth. But yes, I'm got high hopes for that. It's the year of the little movie, and Hard Truth isn't the smallest one in the mix, but it gets up there, and so you want to kind of boost that one as much as you can, so it's not just the heavyweights who take all the attention.
Yeah, it's that Best Actress race. You're right. It's
oh my
cutthroat.
God.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe our next conversation is that Best Actress as we continue to tear our hair out trying to figure out what's going to actually get nominated. Well, thank you for like physically guiding me around the Governor's Awards and showing me like where to go and like do the best people watching, and then also for coming here to talk to me about it.
Oh, Katey, it's great to spend time with you. Thanks.
Let's do it again next year and all of the years from here on out. They're gonna have to remove me from the Governor's Awards by force. They got a mega fan now.
Sounds great.
So I will be right back in a moment with my conversation with Jesse Eisenberg. So as you'll hear in a moment from Jesse Eisenberg, we had a real connection about shared creative struggles in this conversation. Jesse is an actor, of course, but he's also done a ton of writing. He's done plays, he's written short stories, and now he's written his new movie, A Real Pain, in which he also stars and also is the director. While we were talking about his writing process, both for this and other projects, I realized we've had more or less the same experience of writing something, thinking it's terrible, and then you walk away for a minute and realize it's fine, actually. For me, that's a newsletter, and I'm very proud of my newsletters, but it's not quite on the par of a script for a film like A Real Pain, which has become a real Oscar contender since it premiered at Sundance earlier this year. It's in theaters now. Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin star as a pair of American cousins who go on a tour of Holocaust sites in Poland, which is the country that their grandmother fled during World War II. It's a really funny movie and a really sad movie, and he and Kieran Culkin have this really believable, warm dynamic as two cousins who are really different from each other and they drive each other crazy, but they're united by this really tragic family history and what they both think of as a real pain. Jesse Eisenberg is such a thoughtful and smart interview, even though he was in the midst of this very long press day when we talked, which I think would suck the life out of just about anybody else. He was a pleasure to talk to. A Real Pain is a pleasure to watch. So please enjoy my conversation with the writer, director, and star of A Real Pain, Jesse Eisenberg. I did kind of want to start at the beginning because, your play, The Revisionist, you wrote it based on this initial trip to Poland that really sparked all of this. And you had written that the character in that movie is, I think, like a more obnoxious version of yourself is how you described it at one point. Yeah. And then the character in this movie, like, I guess is enough closely linked to you that I think it's your actual kid who's showing up on FaceTime. Like, why did it feel like it had to be not quite yourself who could be at the center of these stories that would make them make sense as drama?
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I've written several plays that I've acted in. I've never made the characters exactly me because I'm not an interesting person, and I'm always writing characters that are people that I can't figure out. In the process of writing something and writing characters, and my experience has been trying to figure people out. And then even acting in those roles has been me kind of trying to understand the psychology of a different kind of person. And then in this movie, A Real Pain, I'm playing a character that is probably closer to me. But the reason for that is that the other character, Kieran's character, is the kind of larger than life, more interesting, more psychologically interesting character.
Yeah, a person who you yourself in real life want to figure out, so therefore you write that character and bounce off of him in a movie.
In a way, Kieran's character is like the inverse of my character. He's everything David, my character, wants to be. He's comfortable with himself. He's charming. He's funny, and he doesn't hold anything back. I think my character is even envious of Benji's grief, because at least Benji's grief is connecting him to something that has real meaning. My character feels like I'm just floating by in the safety of boredom.
Yeah. I love the kind of inspirational threads that lead to this, where you've got the revisionist, the play. I think you'd said that there was a short story you'd written about cousins or friends on a road trip, and you're kind of figuring out how to do that. And then the Holocaust Tours with Lunch ad that you saw together.
Yeah.
Is that how your brain works with things that you either write or direct or anything, where like something can be floating around its inspiration, and then one day they all somehow fit together and turn into something? Has that happened to you before?
Yeah, I assume I'm like any other writer that, is kind of picking things from their lives to write about. My next movie takes place in the world of musical theater. It couldn't be more different than A Real Pain, but it's because I grew up doing musical theater in community theater in New Jersey, and there was something about that world that was always interesting and always kind of nagging at me to kind of write about and contemplate, because as somebody in the professional arts right now, I miss the purity of that thing, of the community getting together to put on a little play and without any kind of personal ambitions for stardom. And it's a thing I miss so much. And so it's kind of like I'm trying to reconcile in my head what I came from and what I'm currently thrust into, which is just this bizarre world of Hollywood vanity and all this stuff that's uncomfortable for me. And in an attempt to kind of get back to the thing that I really felt more comfortable in, I wrote this script, and it allowed me to write musical songs because I like writing songs. And yeah, so I'll just basically take anything from my life. I think it was John Patrick Shanley or somebody who said, you spend the first 40 years writing about yourself and you spend the last 40 years writing about other people. And I don't know if that has to do with kind of exhausting all of the things that have happened to you, or just becoming a better writer to the point where you don't feel like you have to pick everything from your own life in order to make something feel real.
Well, we're close enough to the same age. I did want to ask about the notion of like turning 40 and midlife crises and all those things, but like I'd never heard someone say it as explicitly as John Patrick Shanley. Does that feel true to you? Like you kind of hit a hinge point in what you can write about or tackle as you turn 40?
Yeah, there's also something a little less interesting about my age now. All of the kind of crazy points in your life where your life can genuinely go in a very different direction are past me. All of the decisions that could have taken me down just something drastically different or something horrible or perhaps even something better were I to meet the moment with a little more bravery or something. Those are done. I'm married with a child, and my life really now is about kind of making sure that my family is, okay, and less kind of worrying about my own existence. And in some ways, I think of my creative pursuits a little bit more from a professional perspective, in the sense that when I was younger, I would write every day. I spent months just writing lyrics to all the countries in the world's national anthems and writing about that. And I just would spend my days doing that. And I would think, well,
because you had a limitless free time because you had no child.
I didn't have a kid. My wife was at work. I was between acting jobs. And so this is what I thought to write. And now I don't even consider doing that anymore. I mean, well, I did it already, but I don't even consider doing it anymore, except now South Sudan exists. And at the time, South Sudan was not a country. But like,
sounds like you got a song to write.
I do have one 80-second song to write. But like now it's like, okay, I know I have these 6 weeks off. I'm going to finish a screenplay that can take me through the rest of the next year that I can shoot and edit and then put out. And then I'll do the next, 2 months of writing or whatever. Yes, I'm really even thinking of my own creative pursuits in this kind of structured way.
Yeah. So then you write the script about musical theater to bring you back to that unstructured time. So it's like a professional way that you can recapture that looseness, maybe?
Yeah, precisely. And the most inspiring things are the things that I haven't exactly figured out yet, because then that gives it real drama and potency. It's the things that you're kind of, at least from my perspective, the things that I'm kind of like self-actualized about are always so boring to write about because they have no urgency to the story.
Well, there's also the like grand tradition of middle-aged men writing about their like self-actualization and like making that the focus of fiction. And it sounds like you have gotten to a point where you're like, nope, that's been done. I got a million other stories that I can actually get into instead. Yeah,
that's true. I'm also pretty aware, probably because I'm an actor, of like the stories that are all being told. And the thing that you just said about kind of like a privileged middle-aged guy trying to find meaning in his life, to me feels like, I read scripts like that all the time. To me, it just feels like too well worn from my attention. And so I try to think outside the box. One of the great advantages I have of being an actor is that I can kind of see the industry from another side. So I know the stories that are constantly being rehashed. And it gives me a bit more insight than maybe if I was just writing personal stuff to what is kind of out there, what tones are being kind of celebrated. There's a movie out last year called Dream Scenario, and it was really liked amongst people in my milieu. And so I started kind of trying to explore worlds like that a little more. I have a foot in the film industry as well as just writing personal stuff.
What about Dream Scenario? Like something like this, a little bit more surreal. Like what about that inspired you?
Yeah, world building a little bit. Like this movie, A Real Pain, is very realistic. In fact, we even filmed this movie in the house my family lived in. So you almost could not get more autobiographical than a movie like A Real Pain. The thing that sets it apart is it's this kind of American-style independent film, but set against the backdrop of Poland. And so the thing that sets this movie apart from like a buddy story is that they're visiting harrowing history that changes the very foundation of their relationship. But in terms of my next movie, I'm just pushing the boundaries a little bit, creating a world that is a little bit different than our own, and just trying to push my cinematic abilities to challenge myself so that I'm not just kind of making the same thing. As nervous as I am about doing anything, I feel even more nervous about not pushing myself, because I could sense that is when my work will become stale.
When something dies inside you. I mean, it does feel like you set up some kind of world in A Real Pain. Like, you think of the American Road movie. I can't imagine the guys of Easy Rider, like, hanging out with a bunch of retirees on a tour. Like, there's some kind of community world that you've built in that, which I really like. I think it adds so much to the story of these two cousins. Like, was that essential to you? Did that make this movie feel more right to you? That it's not just these two guys, it's this community they have?
Yeah, you hit it exactly on the head. This movie, I started writing it about these two guys who go to Mongolia to visit an old friend, and basically it was just them in a bubble, and the dynamic was just not that fascinating. And then once I put them on this tour with people, with, as Benji says, this geriatric Polish tour, with an earnest tour guide played by Will Sharp, with a survivor of the Rwandan genocide who's based on my real friend Deloge, with a woman like Jennifer Grey who's going through a divorce and kind of out there seeking, like maybe her old life of fun, and is feeling like Kieran can provide that for her. And then, as they say, a boring suburban couple from Shaker Heights, Ohio. Once you put a character like Kieran in that room, this kind of unpredictable, charming, antagonistic live wire, it makes the kind of sparks fly in a way that if it's just Benji and David in rooms together, it's just the same repeated beat of kind of this love-hate, push-pull, intimidation, love thing. And so, once I figured out this kind of tour, I just thought this is just a perfect kind of like backdrop for what these two guys are going through. And they're now airing all of their dirty laundry onto this group, which is just such a great dynamic too, because you can learn about these characters as they confide in very varied group of people.
Is there a part of you that either a director or writer, actor, something that relishes those scenes, like the dinner scene and this one, where like there's this silence and you can read so much into the silence and everyone in the room is trying to figure out how to navigate out of it? Like there's Benji in this movie creates so many of those moments, and I wonder if you just really relish making them happen.
Yeah, it's my single favorite thing in the world. My background is in playwriting, and I would have a 40-page scene in a play that lasts for 40 minutes where it's just this long marathon of deeply uncomfortable truths coming out, and there's nothing in the world like performing a scene like that. It's the most exhilarating experience in the world to do these kind of extended scenes that have a real kind of up and down flow to them, where characters are coming in and out of the scene, as Benji does from this one of our climactic scenes. Benji goes to the bathroom, and it gives David, my character, this opportunity to just open himself up, bare his soul, and express everything he thinks about this guy that everybody has been charmed by. And so, that's my favorite thing in the world. And then performing them too. 99% of movie scenes are like a half a page long, and the characters are usually pointing at a little explosion and going, let's go that way. And so to do any scene that has like a real kind of beginning, middle, and end, and all sorts of twists and turns and awkward pauses, as you say, created mostly by Kieran's character, is like the thing that makes acting enjoyable.
I think you've said that dinner scene where you said your character David has kind of this monologue moment was a really tricky one for you as a director, because you are taking the center and the camera is pushing in on you, and you have this impulse as a director. Most of the movie is not about your character at all. Can you just talk to me about how you push past that? I think this is the first time you've directed yourself, and so how do you get used to that and figure out how to be the right director and not just make it about yourself?
It's strange, because also when I'm playing a character, I tend to have all the feelings that the character has during the day, because, it's only natural that if you're acting and behaving a certain way that your character should have that too. And one of the things my character is feeling is that he wants to disappear. And so I'm also like directing myself in a movie where I'm trying to make my character disappear. And so it creates this weird thing where I was actually just avoiding doing shots on me. I was hoping that maybe we could do great shots on Kieran and then a 2-shot, where both of us are in the shot to count for my coverage. And I had great producer and Emma Stone, Ali Herding, Dave McCary, and a great cinematographer, Mihai Dimick, who were constantly reminding me to shoot my own face as well. And there's this particular scene where my character for the first time really comes alive and bears his soul, which is what you're referring to. And I did not even plan a shot on my face. And my producer and cinematographer forced me into doing this long shot. I did one take, and I was humiliated that I even did that take. And we got to the editing room, and I saw, some of the take was a little bit out of focus. So I was like, I should have done it 2 times. But I was just so embarrassed making it about myself.
You had to get out of there as fast as possible.
Yeah, exactly. I apologized to all the other actors. The other actors were so nice. So after the scene ended, they were saying, that was great. And I'm like, I'm so sorry I did that. That was so embarrassing. I'm so sorry. And they were like, why do you keep apologizing? It's kind of obnoxious. So basically, anyway, it was kind of weird. But it's the strange aspect of making a personal movie is that it ends up infecting the style of the movie.
Yeah. Well, does it work like writing where like you write something and then this happens to me, like you set it down, you're like, oh, that's awful, but I'll get back to it later. And then you give it a day and you come back, you're like, oh, that was actually okay. Is editing your own performance the same way where if you get that distance, it's helpful?
Yeah. Katey, I never would have articulated that, but that's literally exactly what happened. That's
literally, so
yeah, that's exactly what happened. As a writer, I write something, it feels good in the moment, you move on to the next thing, and then I start to feel completely self-conscious about it. No, that was terrible. Why did I do that? And then I look at it 6 months later as maybe we're going into production or something with it. I'm like, oh no, that was exactly what I wanted to do. That seems right.
Yep.
And the exact same thing happened. I acted in the movie. I felt mortified. I felt like I was ruining the movie. And I got to the editing room. I watched the first cut of the movie and I thought, yep, I did. I ruined the movie. I knew it. And then we started editing. And the more I got comfortable looking at me in the scenes, the more I realized, oh no, that's exactly what the character is going through. That's exactly what I wanted to do because that's what the character is going through. And so, yes, I wouldn't have articulated that way, but it's exactly the same thing. Yes, I guess it just is about when you create something, because it's from you, you kind of don't give it the benefit of the doubt that it's real. Mm-hmm. You think, oh, I created it, so it must be totally flawed. Whereas when you read somebody else's script, you think, oh, this is a real thing. It's been printed. It must have legitimacy. And you don't provide that same benefit of the doubt to yourself. Only as time passes can you give it that kind of value.
Would you get that feeling also when you've written a script and you're like, okay, well, I wrote in this scene that everyone goes and poses in front of this monument in Poland. Then one day, like, they're actually doing that and real people are doing this thing that you wrote down. You're like, wait a second, this is real? Does that happen to you too on a set?
Yes. It's such a leap of faith to write a thing, especially a thing like in Poland where it's not even your street, or not even like the culture you're in, and then like ask a crew of 100 people to enact the thing.
Yeah.
Which for me is why most things I've written, I've thrown in the garbage. I've been on movie sets where you could tell the thought didn't go into this thing as much as people hoped it did. And you're acting it and you're sitting at this table and your character's supposed to drink wine and you're drinking fake wine all day and you have to pee every 20 minutes because the scenes are 10 minutes long. You're drinking so much fake wine and the scene's not good. And you're sitting there thinking like, I just cannot believe all these people gathered around to do this thing. And so I'm just really, I guess, careful that I would not want to ever be in that situation or put anybody in that situation, that I can't answer every single question a person would have, that I can't justify every little moment in the thing. Because I've been on sets where I'm asking a director or writer, can you help me understand why I'm doing this thing? And sometimes they can't. And you're kind of just like, I see. This is just going to be tough.
We're just stuck here together.
Yeah.
I love that Emma Stone produced this and that you guys have known each other for a really long time. And I wonder what it's like to get to this point where, like, your friend can produce a movie. You guys can get things made. Like, people who you knew 20 years ago when you were all just working in the system and everyone was dreaming of getting something done. Yeah. How's adjusting to that been like? Do you feel like there are doors opening in this way, even though the state for independent film is so dire, but, like, you grow into a career and you get to be able to make things like this with your friends? How do you get used to that?
It's totally surreal. I've been writing since I'm 20 years old, and I've had plays produced and I've had things made, but I never felt really secure in it, and it never felt like the response was exactly the response I was hoping for. And then this movie is the first time where I really feel like audiences are kind of understanding what I'm trying to do, in the sense of trying to create a specific tone, trying to talk about big themes, but from intimate relationships. I really feel like this thing I've been doing on my own is now public. And that feels kind of daunting, but also really good. Emma is a person who, when I met, she was 20 years old, and I could tell within 5 minutes she'll be running everything. She is a real genius. She has this unusual quality where she's just the most engaged person in any room. She's curious as hell. She reads everything. She knows everything. She understands the industry better than any actor I've ever met. And so I feel really... I don't as much feel like Emma and I are peers and we're both getting this thing done. I really feel just a great debt to her. Like, she really understands the world and I don't. And she really understands how to, like, make things happen in the world. I feel indebted to her more so than feeling like equal peers who are both kind of aging into the same kind of, adulthoods. I really feel like she's far superior to me in every way, and that I really feel lucky to work with her. And that's really the feeling I have to her. She's always felt bigger than me. Even when we were both in the same movie and she was 20 and I was 24, she always felt like this is I'm meeting somebody who's destined for greatness, is really how I felt. And so I'm really
What a great feeling when that happens, when you meet someone who has all the potential in the world and they do it. Like, that doesn't always happen that way.
I met Kristen Stewart, too, when she was 17. And I remember going up to the director. I was like, I feel like I'm working with a movie star and I'm humiliated. Like, she was 17 and she wasn't even she had no lines in the scene. And I went up to the director and was like, I feel like I'm working with a movie star. I feel so diminished. She's amazing. And yeah, I had that feeling a number of times, and you just kind of marvel.
When you say that this is the first thing you've made that people are getting it, what is the feedback you're getting that makes you feel like it's landing exactly the way that you wanted it to?
I'll tell you exactly what it is. I've written many plays. I have written books and a movie last year. And this is the first time people are acknowledging this tonal balance that I feel like I've been doing for 20 years, which is to create something that's in the between of comedy and drama that can really talk about things that are sacred in a way that feels relatable and not sanctimonious and not like homework. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and I always felt like people are picking up on the wrong thing. People are picking up on the jokes that I'm making, or people are picking up on me trying to bite off more than I can chew thematically. And this one, it feels like the response is exactly in accordance with how I feel about it. Like, the thing that people like about it is the same thing I like about it. And that's unusual. I guess my taste is not exactly down the middle. And so to me, everything I've written has been, I thought, accessible and worthwhile, but the public hasn't agreed. And now it feels like, people see what I've been liking. People see what I've been doing. It's strange. Yeah. I have the great advantage of being a movie actor, so I get a number of whacks at the ball, whereas people who don't have my privilege get one or two whacks at the ball, and if it doesn't hit, they're done. And so I know I'm lucky.
This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Rebecca Ford. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, where you can also watch the video version of all of this and answer this week's poll. You can also subscribe on Apple or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.